All right, FEMA course IS 1190 National Oil Hazard Substance Pollution Contingency Plan National Response System. Lesson 4 Objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to determine environmental restoration, post-oil hazard substance release, and national resource damage assessment. National Resource Damage Assessment. Under both the Oil Pollution Act and the Comprehensive Emergency Response Compensation Liability Act, as well as several other authorities, responsible party liability, compensation, public harm, and injuries to natural resources, designated natural resources used for the process called the Natural Resource Damage Assessment, calculate the damage resource for the owner of the trusteeship. Damage include costs to restore, rehabilitate, replace, acquire equivalent damage resource. The certain activity National Resource Damage Assessment may be conducted simultaneously with the response. However, the completion of the National Resource Damage Assessment may take years, and final restoration may take decades. And it shows several pictures. All right, the National Resource, was it response or National Resource Damage Assessment Process? Under the Oil Pollution Act's Comprehensive Emergency Response Composition Liability Act, trustees must show casualty, both discharge, release, response effort to leave the injury, public restore, click each of the steps to learn about the process. You have casualty release, pathway exposure, injury. Casualty release, pathway exposure, injury. Pathway release, pathway exposure, injury. Pre-assess what was harmed, identify resource, collect, find series samples, and conduct aerial photography. Assess and plan what can be restored. Field lab testing, model analysis, develop restoration plan. Settlement and litigation. And 3, restore, monitor, and correct restore habits and restore services. National Resource Damage Assessment Fund, in cooperation with the trustee of the responsible party, may agree to fund with the trust for the National Resource Damage Assessment restoration directly. In the absence of the time, the responsible party funding with the trustee of the differential functional mechanism pursuing National Resource Damage Assessment damage of the Circular Oil Pollution Act. For hazardous and substance of the Comprehensive Emergency Response Compensation Liability Act, there are no provisions for the Comprehensive Emergency Response Compensation Liability Act, either the Superfund, Trust Fund, and the National Resource Damage Assessment, or to pay natural resource damages claims related to the release of the hazardous substance. Trustee assignment agency for the internal agency fund of the National Resource Damage Assessment seek reimbursement for the responsible party through settlement, litigation of the national resource damage, and the assessment costs. For oil spills, Oil Pollution Act, the trustees can assess the funding of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund initiated with the National Resource Damage Assessment through the interagency agreement of the National NPFC. Trustees can claim the NPFC for the cost of the conduct of National Resource Damage Emergency Restoration Act and for calculated national resource damage. The NPFC educates the claim request and responsible for seeking the national resource damage. National Resource Damage Assessment cost viable to the responsible party. Alright, new Carissa and the National Resource Damage Assessment case study. On February 4, 1999, the new Carissa was empty with a 660-foot-long cargo ship within a ground in the north of the entrance of the Cosio Bay, Oregon, pounded high surf, strong winds, Pacific storm. Vessel began breaking up, and an attempt was made to burn away some of the 100,000 gallons fuel oil before the ship broke apart. Price amount of the oil released from the damaged ship is difficult to determine. It has been estimated various sources somewhere between 25,000 gallons to 140,000 gallons. Most of the spilled oil is something called the bunker C, extremely thick oil used for fuel by large ships. The bow section eventually refloated, towed offshore, only to break and tow and storm ground again with a new walled Port Oregon, releasing additional oil. The bow section was again refloated, towed far out of sea, sunk by the Navy. Heavy stern section remains stranded with the surf near the entrance of the Coastal Bay. Near cases of damage, if additional of the private property, there remain many of the public owned natural resources that risk the oil, including birds, marine mammals, fish, shellfish, outer beach Boucher's rocky shores as Stoutry of the Casio-Huguenot Bay studies determined 4 to 8 western snowy plovers, state and federal listed threatened species likely perished. 672 other shorebirds were injured and killed. 62 marbled mallets are all stated federally listed threatened species were killed. 2,203 other seabirds and gulls were killed. 29,000 recreation trips were lost and damage value approximately $400,000. For new cars of the Natural Resource Trustee of the Department of Interior, U.S. Department of Agricultural, State of the Oregon, Confederate Tribes of Coast, Lower Upium, Social, Indian, Oregon, Confederate Tribes of Seedy, Indians of Oregon. The responsible parties in this oil spill are the owners and operators and ship of the new Carsa as well as the master of the ship at the time of the incident. New Carsa recovery. In May 2004, the settlement agreement approved with the federal judge resolved the civil lawsuit related with the New Carsa spill. The part of the settlement agreement regarding the natural resource damage required by the responsible party to pay up U.S. $4 million, but settling recognized the downfall of the compensation natural resource damages under a separate agreement with the trustees permitted to submit a law with to the NPFC for an additional money needed to restore the damages, mostly manage the oil spill liability trust fund that provides the funding for the cleanup of the natural resources, restoration cover costs, uncompensating claims, restoring oils resulting from the oil spill in the U.S. The money is then in the fund comes from tax on oil transported within the United States. Damage assessment restoration plan set forth the number of acts and restore resource to serve the loss of the public because of the spill of the public. Plan includes detailed actions should be taken as well as the changes made with the draft plan should be consulted for details. Alright, what is the national response? National Resource Damage Assessment process to determine how much money can be spent on the response, the amount of resource dedicated to the oil spill, injuries, the natural resource, the appropriate amount of the restoration, compensate public cost for its loss, which funding source response is funded from. And that would be the injury of the natural resource, the appropriate amount of the restoration, compensating public for its loss. Or which of these non-defense potential responsible parties? Which of these is not a defense of potential responsible parties? And that was accidental discharge. Alright, Lesson 4 Summary. In this lesson, you've learned about the National Response Damage Assessment, National Response System Funding Mechanism, National Response Damage Assessment Case Study of the New Carcia. Lesson 4 Objectives Review. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe environmental restoration post-oil hazardous substance release national resource damage assessment. Alright, your U.S. National Response Team, and then it gives a picture of their webpage. Alright, your final exam. To receive the credit for this course, you must take the final exam online at the EMD Independent Study Program Secure Exam site. Copies of the exam answer sheet will not be accepted. Answer at least 75% of the questions correctly. Additional instructions completing the exam are provided on the secure site. And that completes the IS 1190 National Oil Hazard Substance Pollution Contingency Plan National Response System and Lesson 4 Testing.